Hello, I'm Robert Antoni. I wanted to thank all of you for supporting Caribbean writers, Caribbean writing, and the seminars, and Arlo for including me among this list of the best writers on the planet. It's a thrill. So I'm going to start with a very short, hopefully humorous, slightly scandalous story that was recently republished. It comes from my first novel, Divina Trace, and it is a bit of a spoof on that novel's obsession with the third eye. And in the novel, the third eye is the Hindu tilak, the spiritual, inward-looking eye. It's also the writer's or artist's eye, the eye of the imagination. And in this story, it's something else again. The story also makes fun of the novel's obsession with structure, and the anatomical organ that you will hear described is also a precise anatomical description of the novel itself. Last thing I should tell you is that this story doesn't belong to me. It belongs to my father. He claims it's a true story, and it happened to him when he was the government doctor in San Fernando, Trinidad. It's called Hindsight. Boy, let me give you a little story while we're here, showing you just what kind of story this story you're hearing has become. It was, I suppose, 3 or 4 years after I'd arrived back from medical school in England. The little nurse comes running in to tell me, "Doctor, their old man standing up outside there, only rubbing up his bamsy, groaning, like he sit down on a porcupine fish." Well, I tell her, we better get him in here right away. So I asked the old man to drop his drawers, and we put him to lie down quiet on the table with the pillow beneath his belly and he bamsy standing up tall in the air in what we call the jackknife position. But before I go in from behind to take a look, I asked the old man, what is the problem? "Doctor," he says, big problem. 90 years I've been shitting like a pelican, my mommy tell me, and this never happened before. "Well," I ask again, what is the problem? He says he can't make a caca. Every time I try, doctor, I feel one pain in my ass like I've been feeding on ground glass and thumbtacks and fish hooks. So I take the proctoscope from out the cupboard. I grease it down liberally with the KY jelly, and I ask the little nun nurse to open up her cheeks for me to push the proctoscope inside. But before I can get near him with this proctoscope, before I can even come close, the old man seizes up his bamsy tight, trembling, and he lets loose a ball like a warrahoon spying a quenk. Aye. Of course, I jump back quick like if it is me sit down on the porcupine fish now. And when the old man's bamsy stops quivering, I ask him what is the matter. He says, "Doctor, I beg you, please don't push that imperial cannon you're holding up inside me. Not to say I'm too man-meant to take little plug-in the soft end like a buller, but doctor, contrary to the doctrines of history, contrary to the chronicles of all the school children's economics books, this little black backside ain't big enough to accommodate the Royal Navy. Well, I have to smile a little bit at that one. I rub up the old man's bamsey nice and gentle, and I promise him so long as he relaxed himself, I wouldn't give him no more pain. But Mr. Adley, I tell him, if you don't let me push this thing inside there, how I go look to find out what giving you all the ground glass and thumbtacks and fish hooks? I tell him to turn his head and try to distract himself. Think about a cricket match or a girlfriend or something so, and I promise him he wouldn't feel the cannon. Now I'll lubricate his bamsey hole too with a squeeze of the KY jelly to try to relax him. And now he tells me, doctor, I don't know what kind of thing you're putting up inside me there. All I can say, it must be made from ice cream, cool and soft and lovely. Now I slide the proctoscope inside easy enough. I pump up the little bulb a few times to send some air inside there to inflate the mucosal folds, and I light up the little light bulb at the end. But boy, when I bend down to take a look, when I focus my eye through this proctoscope, is now I feel the porcupine fish. Just there at the recto-sigmoid junction, where the third portion meets up with the sigmoid flexure, because the rectum is constructed in 3 divisions of 5 and 3 and 0.5 inches in length. The first half curving forward and downward toward the apex of the prostate gland shining in the middle, then upward and curving again on itself to culminate with the orifice of the fecal opening in the end. In other words, right there at the onset, in the very beginning, just there at the source of this old man's rectum, I find an eyeball inside there staring at me cool, like if I am the asshole looking out. Of course, this thing is impossible, could never be. But the harder I look, the surer I am that is exactly what it is. And of course, when I nudge my nose at the proctoscope for the little nurse to take a look-see, she only lets loose a cry, Mother of Jesus, and she bolts for the door. Of course, I excuse myself a quick wee and I bolt out the door behind her. I fire down a quick one. And when I get back, I tell the old man, Mr. Adley, I don't know how to put this thing any other way. You got a third eye inside there blinking at me right up at the top of your asshole. Of course, the old man gives me a face like I gone Vikey now for true. But then he begins to chuckle a little bit. He bamsey still standing up tall in the air, jiggling way. Mr. Adley, I tell him, if you know a pretty joke, you better give it to me quick, because just now I got shit down this place with enough caca for you and me together. Doctor, he says, that eyeball you're seeing not belonging to me at all, even though in truth I must be carrying it around a good long time. That eyeball belonged to me daddy. You see, daddy used to wear that eyeball made from glass bottle. And he used to take it out every night and leave it in a cup of water above the kitchen sink. The story goes that one morning as a little boy, I climbed up on top of the sink and I drank down the cup, eyeball and all. So, doctor, I suppose that glass bottle eyeball must be rolling around my belly all these years, and it only now stick up on the way out. Well, I tell him, as they say, hindsight don't drive motor car. And that is a good thing, because if you ever want to shit happy again, I have to remove it. Pluck it out, he says. Let me smell my way to Dover. England, I ask. No, Dr. Shakespeare, you play the Regan from me old Grenada is the plague of the times when madmen lead the blind. Oh ho, I say, in that case, you better open up your ear hole again for me to pour in the poison. Now I take the anoscope from out the cupboard. I grease it down too, and I replace it for the proctoscope. I press down the lever to open up the two halves of the anoscope. I reach inside there with a long ring forceps, and in no time at all, I pluck it out. Of course, before I have a chance to remove the anoscope, before I have a chance to brace myself, boom, 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 boom. And boy, that ain't ground glass, it ain't thumbtacks, and it ain't fish hooks. It come out flowing easy as poetry. So now I'm going to give you, let me say, that's one kind of hindsight, and this is another. My new novel, Cut Guavas, is written in a screenplay form. I call it a fan fiction novel. It tells the story of my uncle, Austin Stoker, an actor living in Studio City, California in 2016. Austin left Trinidad as a young man with a big dream of becoming a movie star, eventually making his way to Hollywood, where he became one of the first successful black actors during the 60s and 70s. Austin is best known for his starring role in director John Carpenter's Assault on Precinct 13. Some delightfully kitschy 70s stuff to us, it's been recognized as the most important film of Carpenter's career and the most important action film of its era and a cult classic.
You want to be a hero your first night out, Lieutenant?
Yes, sir.
Ethan Bishop.
Black?
For over 30 years.
I really think someone in the central office wanted to give you something special on your first night out.
Okay, bring him in.
It's war in the streets.
Now what?
Power failure?
It's terror in the night. It's the most shattering assault on a police station in history. Precinct 13, cut off, isolated in the middle of the city.
It's a goddamn siege.
As a human wave of street killers turns the night into a nightmare.
All right. What does it mean? What does it mean?
Means to the death.
Precincts and vehicles. Emergency! Emergency!
Assault on Precinct 13.
So Austin also starred in the final movie of the original Planet of the Apes series, here retitled for fear of 20th Century Fox's legal team as Assault on Precinct of the Simians. Assault on the Civilization of the Simians. Yeah, he does that too. In that movie, Austin's character took the Simian king to the underground archives of the bombed-out Forbidden City to view a film revealing the secret of the king's past, the treacherous murder of his parents when he was an infant. Now, in 2016, Austin is 83 years of age and semi-retired. He suffers from memory loss due to the onset of dementia, causing him to confuse his two previous assault films and lots of other things besides. And of course, there's nothing more sacred to an actor than their memory. But Austin has a stroke of luck. After 43 years, they're finally making the sequel to the Simian film, and Austin is hired to play the part of himself with a plot reversal. This time, it's the Simian king who takes Austin back to those forbidden archives to review another film, this one revealing the secret of Austin's own parentage in Trinidad, 1932.
Assault on the civilization of the Simians. Actor Austin Stoker is Anderson, leading Maximus and Homer out from their restored Eden to the bomb-ravaged Forbidden City. Its only inhabitants a tribe of strange mutant humans, the Simians, their sworn enemy, eking out a macabre, mole-like existence. In the underground archives, the trio retrieves a long-forgotten videotape, and Maximus learns the secret of his ascent to kingship, the traitorous murder of his parents. But that innocent intrusion into the archives sparks the mutants' murderous attack. The Simians barely survive. Now, after a decade of peace on the Simian calendar, the equivalent of 43 human years, comes the sequel, the most spectacular of all the ape adventures, climax of the epic series that made motion picture history. Now, in this sequel to Assault, a considerably older Stoker plays the part of himself in the final film. In a moment of truth, he bears his deep emotional scars to the king, the word illegitimate inscribed in the central column of his birth certificate. This time it is Maximus who leads our trio back to those forbidden archives. Another tape is unearthed, the video revealing Stoker's own history in Trinidad, 1932. As 83-year-old Stoker witnesses firsthand the salacious and clandestine love affair that produced Austin Stoker. Postscript to the civilization of the Simians.
So these are my novel's two stories, that of 83-year-old Austin in Studio City, California, 2016, and the story of the Simian sequel film, Postscript, set in Simian City, 2680. Needless to say, in Austin's mind, these two stories tend to blur as the novel shifts back and forth between them. But there's still another story, that of the videotape retrieved from the archives, the film within a film set in Trinidad, 1932. This story attempts to imagine the secret affair that occurred between Austin's mother, Madeline, and my own grandfather, Bartow. It's the place in my novel where the writing shifts from the screenplay to a more standard novel form. And this Trinidad story is also the place where the writing becomes most autobiographical, not only for Austin, but for me too. So my reading begins with the set directions of a screenplay shifting to the prose of a novel. Black and white, old film look. Interior shot of dining room in a palatial French colonial home. Former dinner party in progress. Camera draws in, roams the table and diners. We see the table set with lace tablecloth, fine china with all manner of enticing West Indian food. Crystal glasses with champagne, red wine, a feast. The women wear lace gowns, the men black tuxedos. At one end of the table sits an older gentleman of Corsican heritage, small in stature, with graying mustache. At the other end, the younger, plump madame of Spanish background. The other diners' backgrounds are Corsican, French, Spanish, Venezuelan, all white Creoles. We hear, over the clatter of eating and drinking, Trinidadian West vernacular English. Black female servants in black uniforms with starched aprons and head caps circulate unnoticeably serving food. A tuxedoed butler wearing white gloves discreetly pours red wine. Superimpose card over tablecloth, lower center of frame. Archival recording, Austin Stoker, born Port of Spain, Trinidad, British West Indies, November 7, 1932. Here the writing shifts to that of a novel. I was 16 when my 97-year-old grandmother pulled me toward her in her wheelchair, sitting beside her vitrina crowded with miniature plaster saints, yellowed photographs of dead relatives, a postcard of the Pope, a shaking, mischievous smile pulling across her vein-colored gums, whispering, "Bobby, one thing I could tell you about your grandfather, eh? That man could fuck like hell." It must have been true. Bartow died at the age of 49, yet he left my grandmother with 6 boys and 2 girls, and another boy had died in infancy. That's 1 child for every 2.3 years of marriage. My grandmother used to say that by the time my father, their youngest, arrived, and she went into labor in the middle of a Christmas fete, she simply put her glass of poncha crema down and climbed the stairs to look for a bed, and she never even bothered to take off her stockings. Then she went back down and danced to the parang. Bartow also had a mistress born in Buenos Aires, supposedly of aristocratic blood, and supposedly he had 3 other children by this mistress. My Venezuelan grandmother told me she used to get together with her sometimes for lunch. They were friends. She made empanadas. My grandmother made pastels. They spoke Spanish together. I think my grandmother may have actually felt grateful to this Argentinian mistress. She saved her from 3 more children she'd have probably had to bear herself. But I don't think my grandmother ever met Madeline, Austin's mother. If she had, I like to believe my grandmother would have made friends with her also. I like to imagine them having lunch and speaking Spanish together. I see them eating callaloo. There aren't many photographs of Bartow, though my grandmother did pass one down to us of the famous Salvatore wedding. In the picture, my grandmother is a bridesmaid and Bartow a groomsman. The wedding ceremony where Bartow and my grandmother first met, which is the reason they're not standing together in the photograph, taken in the side grotto of the newly constructed Salvatore home, Mil-Flores. My grandmother's handwriting can be seen in the upper right corner, identifying everybody. The little groom in the middle is Joseph Salvatore, a Corsican who sold bolts of cloth off the back of his bicycle when he arrived in Trinidad. His bride is of Spanish background, so like many such couples in the early days who spoke different languages, they communicated in the adopted language of their adopted colony, improper English. My grandmother is head bridesmaid, second woman from the right. She boasted her hat was the biggest of them all, her arm entwined with that of a prominent English surgeon. I don't have to tell you who Bartow is. Cigar poised between his fingers like he's got more important things to think about. He's really incidental to the wedding ceremony itself, yet the entire photograph is somehow about him. Somehow he manages to eclipse them all, even my grandmother. And you can tell me if the woman clasping his arm is smiling saucily, scared out of her skin, or both. Bartolomeo Odilo Antoni was born in Corsica, but he immigrated as a young man to Trinidad. He became a successful trader of coffee, cocoa, and primarily tonka beans. The Salvatore wedding photograph is prophetic in that it marks the meeting of my grandparents. But I've decided that this photograph is prophetic for another reason and for another person not seen in it. The Salvatore newlyweds would eventually hire a young black Creole girl by the name of Madeline Stoker, of African and Portuguese background, as their house and kitchen servant. Madeline was born on the smaller and poorer island of Grenada, but she was brought by her parents first to Caracas, where she learned Spanish, then to settle in Trinidad. The same Spanish she would speak with Madame Salvatore, Madeline soon becoming her favorite. If this were an actual film, as we say in Trinidad, then the imagined scene of the dinner party we have begun to witness would have taken place inside the same home that forms the background of the photograph. Only the dinner would occur 19 years later, after the Salvatores and my grandparents had been married for 19 years, and my father, their youngest, had been born and reached the age of 3. Barto would die before my father turned 8. Austin, born the year of the imagined dinner party, 1932, would, at Barto's death, have reached the age of 4. Returning again to that dinner party where we left it, we see through the camera's eye as it gives us all the particulars of this West Indian setting, this historical moment. All of the food, dress, culture, the ostentatiousness of these white Creole diners in stark contrast to the blacks serving them, that impassable gulf. Now the camera narrows its focus, bringing us back to our story. This story, it settles on Barto. The camera feels glued to him, his jet black, slicked back hair, porcelain skin, his flashing eyes, lush lashes, elaborate mustache, his masculine hands with the manicured nails, the conviction of every gesture. Suddenly, as though stepping forth from a blurred background, one of the servants comes sharply into focus. She's working her way around the table, serving white rice from a silver platter. Her movements dexterous, firm, dignified, almost haughty, a striking black Creole, early 20s, her long hair in a neat braid wound into a crown beneath her cap. Her halting feature, her glossy, almond-shaped eyes, Aubrey Hepburn eyes. We watch as she works her way around the table until eventually she comes to Barto, reaching over his shoulder to serve him. We see his head turn, inattentive at first, looking slightly back, slightly up. Then the camera does that magical thing that astonishes and perplexes language, that outperforms language, that magical thing that only a camera can do. It gives us a moment, isolated within the continuum of time. No one but us sees it. Fleeting, unspoken, irrefutable. The sudden electricity that passes between Bartow and Madeline when their eyes lock for an instant. Suddenly, Madeline cannot continue around the table. We watch her pause, distracted, and she turns her head and looks straight at us. Her witness implicated. We see her raise her hand, still holding the silver spoon, to her forehead. A single grain of white rice, as if in slow motion, falls from spoon to platter again, and she turns and walks out of the frame to our left. Inside, the kitchen is chaotic. A whirl of black uniforms, white bib aprons, and stiff white headcaps. And Madeline, there at the center, her expression blank, stunned. Holding a glass pitcher half filled with water in one hand, small wicker basket with guavas hanging from the other. She dodges a servant with a cheese platter and hurries across the kitchen, exiting through a door at the back. Now the camera returns to the dining table, to our feast in progress. It narrows its focus back to Bartow, seated as before, wiping his mouth with his napkin. And as the other diners around him continue eating and conversing, Bartow folds his napkin and places it on the table beside his empty plate. Then he removes a pouch from a breast pocket, taking out a cigar, and stands slowly. He turns, walking out of the frame to our left. The camera holding this shot of the table of animated diners, seemingly in the midst of a toast, their glasses raised. Bartow's chair empty at the center. Cut to a view of the behind kitchen, a separate room like a pantry, isolated, quiet, and Madeline alone. The camera zooming into her back as she works at the counter. She is peeling guavas for dessert with a paring knife, but the former blank expression on her face seems to have shifted, seems to have hardened, possibly revealing an irritated distraction, frustration, possibly even anger. The camera draws in for a close-up of her hands and the anger in her hands as she works the paring knife on a wet guava with her agile fingers is palpable. Behind, looming large, is the glass pitcher half filled with soaking guava shells, purple-pink, luscious, visceral. The camera shifts to a shot angled down over Madeline's shoulder as she continues peeling the guava. Beside the pitcher is a small mound of discarded guava guts and flayed skin. Now, from over Madeline's shoulder, looking down, we see the manicured hand of a white man. His sharp white French cuff and the sleeve end of his black tuxedo jacket just visible behind the cuff, reaching into the frame from behind Madeline's back to our left. Because we inhabit Madeline's body now, we can feel the shocking, thrilling, terrifying presence of this man pressing up softly yet solidly against our back. We can smell his cologne and the cigar after odor over the pungent guava. And we are no longer sure if the pounding we hear and feel in the hollow of our neck just below our throat belongs to him or to us. The hand places a cigar down on the wet counter, then settles over the back of our own hand, stops still, arrested in ear, holding the half-peeled guava. And as if it suddenly has a mind of its own, as if it can think for itself, our right hand rolls palm up, the small, wet, gleaming knife balanced there. Now the white man's other hand reaches around us from our right side, this hand slowly taking up the knife, placing it carefully down on the wet counter. And our left hand, the hand still covered by his hand, the hand we cannot even remember or feel, still holding the half-peeled guava. Our left hand rolls over of its own accord too, acting on its own, thinking for itself, his hand rolling together with it, inverted now, cupping ours below. The wet hand above opening, offering, palm up, our own two hands, as the half-peeled guava tumbles out and across the counter, and we hear it thud quietly to the floor. So that's more novel.